If we live long enough, and if we enter into relationships with other people, which most of us will do over the course of our lifetime, we are going to be hurt. And guess what? We're going to hurt other people. And sometimes we hurt people without even knowing that we're hurting them. And sometimes people offend us and they don't even know that they've offended us. And so one of the things that it is very important, in fact, it's critical for us to learn as we go through life, is we have to learn how to forgive other people. Now I know that someone says, well, why do I have to forgive someone? Why, if someone, you don't know what they've done to me. In fact, you don't know how long they've been doing it. You don't know the fact that I've been forgiving them over and over again, and each time I continued to forgive them, they kept doing it again. In fact, they abused me. And so why should I forgive them? Well, we're going to talk about that. Because one of the things that we will learn is that forgiveness is not just for the other person, but it's for who? It's for us. And forgiveness affects many different areas of our life. In fact, when you and I fail to forgive other people, we are giving that person or that event control over our present life and our future life. It's like they have a rope tied around our waist and they're holding us back. In fact, if I can pick up this backpack here, and if I put this backpack on, and let's just say it's filled with weights, and I'm going through life and this backpack is heavy, this is like carrying around anger and bitterness and resentfulness from something that someone has done to me. And so this backpack is going to be a burden to me, and it's going to slow me down for many, many years into the future. In fact, there are people that wear backpacks their entire life. I've talked to people in what we call a women's transition center. It's basically a low security prison where women are transitioning out of the maximum security back into society. And many of them have told me that one of the reasons that they ended up there, not the only reason, but one of the contributing factors that got them there was that they had been holding in something or holding something against their mother or their father or uncle or teacher or previous spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend. They'd been holding that against the person. They didn't forgive them, and it caused them or influenced them to act out, to get involved with the wrong crowd, to get involved in drugs, to go out and commit crimes and end up where they are now. But the wonderful thing is that they realized that they forgave that person, and sometimes the people had already passed away, but they forgave that person, they let it go, and now they were able to move forward. So when we don't forgive other people, it literally does hold us back. It gives that person, that event, control over our life. But also, now watch this, forgiveness affects us in at least 4 areas. 1, it affects us physically. Now how in the world could unforgiveness affect us physically? Well, just like any other kind of stress, any other kind of psychosomatics, what we call it, illness, it can affect us physically by, for example, giving us headaches or migraines. It can lower our immune system, our resistance, and cause us to get sick and develop diseases. It can give us ulcers and stomach aches. It can cause us not to be able to sleep well. It can cause us to sleep too much because of perhaps depression. It can cause us to stop eating or to overeat. And so it can have a huge physical impact on us when we don't forgive other people, because one of the things that comes out of unforgiveness is anger and bitterness. And bitterness is like a poison that when it gets inside, it develops and it grows and it takes over every area of our life. And so when that happens, it impacts us physically. But it also affects us emotionally. Right? Emotionally, mentally, psychologically. And I mentioned, of course, depression. It can cause us to have a low self-esteem. It can cause us to be too arrogant. And so it can affect us emotionally and mentally and psychologically. It can cause people to have emotional breaks with reality. It can also affect us interpersonally. That is, it can affect our relationships with other people. When we are not forgiving others, it can affect our relationship with other people. Have you ever met someone who's just angry all the time? They're always ready to retaliate and to fight. If you try to love that person, they keep you at a distance. You try to hug that person, they don't want to be touched. Well, there's something that may have gone on in their life that they weren't able to let go of. And so it can affect us. In fact, it does affect us in our relationships with other people, because what it does is it prevents us, or prevents that person from being able to truly love and trust other people. And then it can affect us intrapersonally. That is, it can affect how we feel about ourselves and how we see ourselves. And a part of this is because there is a spiritual reason that we are to forgive people. And when we don't do that, it affects our inner core. It affects who we are, our spirit, ourself. And I'll show you this in just a little while, how in fact it affects us. And then finally, it affects our relationship with God. It affects our relationship with God, because God tells us that we are to forgive other people. And I know that someone's saying, well, you don't know what I've been through, and how can God tell me to forgive, because God didn't have to deal with this person. And doesn't it mean if I forgive the person that I'm justifying what they did and I'm letting them off the hook and that they're going to keep doing it? No, it doesn't mean that at all. We're going to talk about what forgiveness is and what forgiveness is not. Because when we have a clearer understanding of what forgiveness is, then we're able to forgive people while we are still protecting ourselves and while we are still having healthy and safe relationships with other people. By understanding what forgiveness is and what forgiveness is not, we're able to protect ourselves, protect our families, have healthy relationships and safe relationships with other people. So it certainly affects our relationships with others. It affects us physically. It affects us emotionally and mentally. It affects us intrapersonally, that is within ourselves. It affects our relationship with God. One of the things that unforgiveness does is it causes us to have this, or it can cause us to have this sense of guilt, the sense of guilt between us and God. And someone says, well, why would I feel guilty? Well, if you've ever said the Lord's Prayer, then you know it says in there, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And we'll take a look at that passage. And then in several other passages, it tells us to forgive others. It just says, listen, do away with the anger and the malice and the bitterness and forgive others as Christ has forgiven you. So when we clearly choose, I'm not going to forgive that person. I've forgiven them 55 times and this is it. Then we are really disobeying what God has told us to do. And when we disobey what God has told us to do, and God is only telling us to do this because it's good for us and it's good for other people. It's good for us and it's good for other people. So when we disobey that, then there's this distance between us and God. Because whenever we go to talk to God, we're going to hear this little voice that says, have you forgiven this person? Or, why are you holding this in against this person? And so we have this distance from God, so there's this sense of guilt that we have between us and God. And when there's a sense of guilt, then the communication is lessened, it's diminished. The intimacy and the trust is lessened and diminished. We don't trust God because we're not talking to God, because we're not hearing from God. Does this make sense? So forgiveness and unforgiveness affects every area of our life. So it's important to understand what forgiveness is, what it's not. But we're also going to look at why we should forgive, some of the benefits of forgiving other people, and how to forgive. What's the process? Are there some steps that we can take to forgive? We don't just say, well, I forgive you and I'm just going to forget about it, and we suppress it and repress it and that's it, because that also is not forgiveness and it's not healthy. So how do we actually forgive other people? And that is what we're going to be looking at next. We're going to be looking at what is forgiveness, what are the benefits, why should we forgive, and then how.